Hey everyone, my name is Catherine and welcome to my channel. I today wanted to talk about my experience traveling with EF Ultimate Break, or as it was originally or previously known as EF College Break. And I actually did a video comparing EF Ultimate Break or College Break, whatever you want to call it, to Kentucky, and a lot of you guys have liked it. And I did that because I have gone on both programs and have done multiple trips with both programs, so I've been able to really see the similarities and the differences between both. And I thought I would do individual ones as well, maybe talk more about them in depth and what trips I went on them with. And I will also give a disclaimer that every trip I've gone with both Kentucky and EF was before the pandemic, so I don't know how different it looks like now. I would love to do another one of them soon. I first started traveling with EF back in September of 2015, and I did what was called their European road trip. That was actually my first time traveling by myself, like without parents or anything like that, internationally, so that trip has like a special place in my heart. And then I also did their Eastern Europe trip in August of 2016, and then I did their England, Scotland, and Ireland trip in May of 2017. Starting off with my first trip, like I said, went to the European road trip. I actually in that summer saw advertisements for EF College Break at the time via Facebook, so that's how I found out about them, was good old ads. And I have gone on these trips by myself before, and I've gone with friends, so I can compare the two. I was able to convince a friend of mine to go to this trip with me. What I really like about these trips is that you get to meet new people, but you're put into this trip all together, and you're gonna be together for a week, 2 weeks. Some of these trips even go for a month plus. You get to really get to know these people for that period of time and really make more in-depth quality friendships because you have more time with them and you have this set schedule all together. I've been able to make friends and meet up with them later, or just keep in contact with them, see what they're up to on social media. My European road trip, we flew into Amsterdam, and then we went through Germany, and we went to Switzerland, which I really want to go back because in order to fit all these places in like a week and a half or so, 2 weeks, you don't get to stay for very long, which is, you know, always depends on what you want to do. But we did get to like go up the Swiss Alps on like this little train along the mountain and just see the most gorgeous views. We went to Venice, and then we did kind of like a U. So started at the top of Amsterdam, went down to Venice, stopping by Germany, Switzerland, and then Austria as well. And then we went up and we went through France and stopped in Paris. We ended off in London, and at that point it was the end of the trip, so I'd made all these different friends and it was great. And a lot of times with these trips, because most likely you're not going to find a friend that like lives in the same city as you, but you can, by like maintaining your friendships, a lot of friends will book future trips together, so that's great. And that ended up happening to me. My next trip, going into it, I didn't go with a friend from like home that I knew well, but I knew of someone already traveling in this trip because of my first trip, the Eastern European road trip that I went on in 2016. We started in Budapest, which was beautiful, and then we went to Vienna. I went to Prague, which was great. They had really yummy desserts, I remember. It was like kind of like a donut cone with cinnamon and an ice cream in it, which was really yummy. And it was just a really beautiful, just such a traditional European town and beautiful to walk around. And then there was Krakow, which was in Poland, and then we ended off in Warsaw. So going back to some commonly asked questions and whatnot, I would say EF College Break or Ultimate Break is mostly made up of Americans. I also feel like EF trips are a bit smaller. One nice thing I remember is besides like the flight to and from your starting and ending cities, you normally get from city to city by bus, by the way, and you have the same bus typically throughout the whole trip. So how it's organized is you have the people that you're traveling with, like other similar travelers like you that booked this trip as like customers and all of that. And then you have your like EF like trip manager who's there with you the whole time from start to end and manage the whole trip for you, and they're your go-to person if you need help with something. And then you have your bus driver that's also employed by EF. And then each city you go to, you have like a tour guide that's a local and has lived and is a registered tour guide in that country and city. And they actually give you the proper tours of the cities, because your EF trip manager, they probably have gone to these cities dozens of times and know them well, but they're not like a local. So you'll also get like a local to show you around, and that's typically like when you first get there, your first day, you get those tours. One thing I liked about EF is that because it's a smaller group typically, and you have pretty long drives between cities, like several hours, so it's when a lot of people will like catch up on sleep. And when you have less people, how buses are typically like 2 people seats and then they go back, so it's like 2 rows of 2 and it goes back. When there's less people, I remember on multiple EF trips, everyone got to have their own row, so you got to like stretch out your legs and like have a backpack on a seat, and then you get your own seat and you can lean against the window and try to rest. Whereas if it's double that amount of people and everyone has to share a seat, you have to like be seated. You can't like sprawl out when you try to nap or just relax. And it makes a huge difference when you go traveling, by the way. So that was one plus. I remember I got used to that with EF for like the first 2 or so trips. And then when I went on other companies and they had like double that amount of people, I was like, this is something you don't think about, and it like makes a huge difference on your trip. I would also say with EF, any trip you go on, there's going to be partiers and people that like to go out. But I feel like with EF, it seemed more tame than other tour companies, and I liked that because I'm not much of a going out person. I also just don't drink at all. I would say there's less partying going on, so if that's something you would prefer, EF has less of that. Still has it, but less of that. Moving on to the next trip I went to England, Scotland, and Ireland in May of 2017, and that was a really fun trip as well. After going to London at this point for like 3 different times or something, I was like, okay, I want to see like other parts of England. I just really liked England for some reason, and so this trip would allow me to see other parts of England and also Scotland and Ireland. And I remember trying to convince friends to go with me. No one wanted to go with me, so I just finally ended up going alone. Like, first trip I knew someone, like a good friend that I'm still friends with. Second trip, I knew someone from my previous EF trip, so that made me feel better. This last trip, I knew no one. So I went into it not knowing anybody, and it ended up being great. I ended up making friends. I remember making this one specific friend that actually lived like kind of like near Vegas, sort of, not really. She lived in like Utah, but later in the summer I went to Las Vegas with my family, and she ended up being in Vegas for the day, just driving through. And I met up with her. So it's just kind of funny like how things work out in the future. It's just fun to have friends in random cities throughout the US or world or whatever, and when you happen to be in that city, you can just like say hey and meet up with them. I've had multiple instances like that. I really did like this trip, and it was really beautiful just seeing the countrysides of these countries, but also seeing the cities themselves. Like, I went to Dublin. I remember going to the Titanic Museum, which was really cool, in Belfast. I loved Edinburgh, and I had a girl who, you have like Facebook groups and whatnot that you can connect with prior, and there was this girl who was also coming in earlier, so we specifically booked the same hostel. Okay, I'm back. My camera ran out of memory, but basically me and this friend just walked up this hill, and I remember it being beautiful with like these yellow flowers everywhere. And we went on like a ghost tour in Edinburgh, because Edinburgh is the most haunted city in Europe apparently, and I'm not a fan of the paranormal or ghosts. I still don't know how I feel about whether I believe in them or not, but I just kind of want nothing to do with them. Like, they just freak me out. So yeah. How I agreed to go on this tour, I don't know, but I just remember going on it, and there was like this circle, and it looked like rocks, and someone was like, the tour guide was like, if you go into this circle, you're gonna have like demons and whatnot possess you, and like people who have gone in the circle in the past, the next morning woke up with scratches and bruises on themselves, and I'm just like, I don't know if I believe that, but I'm not gonna risk it. And as we were leaving, this one girl on the tour, and this was just a random tour in Edinburgh, like I went with 1 or 2 people from my trip, but then there was also strangers in this tour as well, and this one girl just like walked straight through it like with a stoic face, and everyone's like so I don't know if like anything happened to her, but like I just remember that. But it's just really fun having all these stories. And I will say that when it comes to these trips, one thing I like about them is that they are structured, so you know where you're going or what cities you'll be and what days, and like where you're staying and all of that stuff, and it's taken care of for you. But you also have free time within each city, and you're able to do what you want, whether it's completely by yourself if you need that time as an introvert or whatever, or you can join other people in what they're doing. There's activities that EF has set aside for an additional cost, so it's an option if you want to do it. And then there's the main ones that is organized for you, and it's typically like the main sites that you're gonna want to see, like the castle in Edinburgh, or just like doing those like tours, whether they're a walking tour or on the bus by the tour guide that EF has hired with a local guide. When it comes to like the types of accommodations, it really depends where you are, I think, more than the tour you're on. Like for example, when I went to like the Middle East, like Egypt and whatnot, with Kentucky, my accommodations were nicer than my EF European road trip accommodations, and that's because I think with Egypt, maybe Kentucky didn't feel comfortable with people staying in hostels, for example, so you basically just had a roommate for the whole tour, and you got like a room that was 2 beds the whole time, so it felt more like a hotel. And I went with a friend that I already knew, so I basically just shared like a room with my friend the whole time. Whereas with the EF Ultimate, EF European road trip, you know, Europe is really well known for their hostels, so a lot of that was just hostels throughout the trip, which I didn't prefer as much, but also it's just more safe and more common for that to be the case. It really just depends, so it's kind of hard to answer the accommodations, but I will say you always have the option to upgrade to either single room or like a double, and if you have a friend coming or like a significant other that you want to just stay with them, you always have that option. And I think I even saw on EF there's certain trips that are just like that trip plus, so it's automatically upgraded for you. I had not done one of those trips, and I don't think they were even an option when I went on these trips. So yeah, that's kind of been my experience with EF, just kind of doing an overview on it. As for like if you're interested in doing a trip, if you want a code or anything like that, I thought I had a code and it expired because, you know, I haven't gone since 2017 apparently. And so I did like ask and reached out to them if they could give me a code to share with you guys where you would get $100 off. I asked quite recently and I've not heard back yet, so I will keep you posted. If I do get one, it'll be in the description box below. But thank you guys so much for watching, and if you've done an EF trip, let me know what you think. If you've done another trip from another company, let me know. I've only done EF and Kentucky, so if you've done one with like, what is it, Interpret, I believe, or some other ones, I'd be curious to know. If you plan to do an EF trip, I'd also love to know where you're going. So hopefully with traveling and restrictions and all of that, things get better, because I'm just really excited at the possibility of going on trips in the future, because that's truly like when I'm happiest. And yeah, it's just been a bit too long. I've gone on trips since 2017, just not with EF, but still all before the pandemic. So very excited to be able to do that at some point in the future. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great day or night whenever you're seeing this, and I hope to see you in a future video of mine. Bye!